We are in the course of figuring out why Hume thinks that almost certainly some natural evil is not for the best. And Hume presents four circumstances in the text, and we looked at the first and the third in the previous video, and now we're going to look at the second and fourth actually together and how they work together in this video. So let's get going with that. Hume says that the second one is that a capacity for pain would not of itself produce pain if it weren't for something else, namely the world's being governed by general laws. So part of this is that the world is governed by general laws. And then the last factor that Hume lists is that the workmanship of the universe is very inaccurate. And so it's those two things together. It's the regularity and the poor workmanship together, I think that we're going to think about. So what's going to happen tomorrow? Well, here are a couple things that you might know will happen tomorrow. The sun will rise. Your favorite Starbucks building will be in the same place. Maybe the Starbucks has gone out of business. Probably not, but they do sometimes, the franchises. But the building, at least, is still going to be there, almost certainly. Maybe it's been demolished overnight, or maybe it's been moved, but very unlikely. Almost certainly that building is still there. And then maybe, you work, and maybe you have work from noon to 8. Maybe you don't work, and then you don't have work from noon to 8. Maybe those aren't your hours. But you probably have some idea as to whether or not you're going to be working tomorrow. You may not know for certain because you may be working you may be on call in some way, and so it's not certain. But you may have some sense as to how likely it is that you're going to be working in any way tomorrow. So those are things you might know about what's going to happen tomorrow. How do you know that? How do you know those things? Well, you know about the parts of the universe. You know about the sun, and you know a little bit about how the sun and the earth work. You know about buildings and how they move around or not, and how they persist over time, how they last or go away. You know about yourself. You know about your employer, more or less. So there are different parts of the universe that you know about. And you also know how things change. You know the patterns of change, which are regular. You know that the sun rises every day in the east. You know that buildings tend not to move around. They can move around sometimes. You drive down the freeway and you see that building, for a prefab house being driven down the freeway, but that's pretty unusual. You know that cars accelerate when you step on the gas. You know that people need to eat almost every day. And there are many, many other patterns of change that you know about. So you know about the particular things, and you know about the patterns of change. So fundamentally, we know how the universe works, and in part, not entirely at all, but in part. We know that there are different beings, you, the building, your employer, the sun, the earth, and you know that they behave and interact in pretty regular ways according to what we might think of as the laws of nature, which is something that science investigates. So we know parts of we know some of the beings that exist and a little bit about them, some more than others, and we know some about how they behave and interact in regular ways, and that allows us to make predictions. So it's because the universe has all these different parts and operates in regular ways, you can then learn about that and then make predictions. So the regularity is good. If the world were completely chaotic, you wouldn't be able to make any predictions. If it was completely random, whether or not the building would be there tomorrow. If the sun's behavior was totally random. Sometimes it rises in the east, sometimes it rises in the north, sometimes it never rises, sometimes it stays up all the time. If the world were that chaotic, you wouldn't be able to make any predictions. Now, we don't know everything about how the world is going to unfold, and that allows room for chaos, and that can be fun, and it's nice sometimes to it's certainly nice to learn new things and be in new situations. So Hume's not saying here that only regularity is good, but he's saying that regularity is really helpful because it helps us make predictions, which is accurate. And then the way that the parts are arranged and their regularities, they're good in many ways as well. So, for example, the sun is a good distance from the earth. It's it's not too hot and it's not too cold. If it were closer, it would be like the planets that are closer, Mercury and Venus. They're super hot. Life can't, at least our kind of life, certainly cannot survive on those planets because they're way too hot. On Mars, it's much too cold. So the sun is a good medium distance from the earth to give the right amount of energy to the earth. Not only that, but the basic laws of physics are really nice. Why? Well, because different subatomic particles stick together to form atoms, and those atoms stick together to form molecules, and those molecules can stick together to make the sun and the earth and our bodies and plants and other animals and so on. If matter worked differently, it wouldn't accumulate into stuff, but it does. It can clump together. So that's a good way in which the world works. Matter can coagulate, and we can get bodies that can stay together over time, that aren't like, say, a soap bubble that just pops like that. Plants grow, that provides food for animals. There's drinkable water in many places. There are moderate temperatures at many times and in many places. So in many ways, the way in which the world is arranged and the regularities that the world follows, not just that it's predictable, but they're actually good. But, says Hume, so there's some good design, but Hume thinks there's also lots of bad design. There are many bad outcomes in the natural world. There are hurricanes, there are earthquakes, there are tsunamis, there are cancer, there's COVID, there's organ malfunctions, we have emotional disturbances, and then you may not know this, but in, I think, billions of years, maybe hundreds of millions, but far in the future, the sun's going to expand and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to actually just melt the earth to a crisp, and the earth is going to be gone. So right now, the earth is at the right distance, but in the future, it's not going to be. So there are lots of bad outcomes, and these are all lead, most of these in the end, to death, and along the way, lots of pain. And Hume says, well, are these for the best? Well, he says, given that they're the actual laws of nature, the way the world actually works, and the arrangement of the parts of the world, the sun, the earth, the arrangement of the earth into its many different layers and, different plates that push against each other that cause earthquakes. There's how the atmosphere is distributed, and so on. And this allows for predictability. We can predict what's going to happen to at least some extent, not at all. And there are many good outcomes. And so that's good. Those are benefits of the way the world is currently arranged. However, there are also many bad outcomes. The tsunamis, the earthquakes, and all the diseases and so on. Is it worth it? Probably yes. But is it for the best? Hume thinks no. Hume thinks the world could be built differently. And there are two different ways which could be combined that the world might be work differently. One is that God might tweak the laws to avoid catastrophes. So if we just think about hurricanes, right? So hurricanes, like Hurricane Katrina was catastrophic in New Orleans. Part of that is actually a result of moral evil. It's a result of how the city was designed, who got aid, who didn't. But however humans had responded to Hurricane Katrina, it would have been bad. Could have been a lot better, but it still would have been bad. Well, there are a lot of contingencies that went into the forming, the weather that forms and the warmth of the temperature of the oceans out in the Atlantic Ocean that create hurricanes that then move in and damage large parts of the U.S. or earthquakes, right? The faults grinding against each other. Hume says, look, that happens because of the laws of nature. But, God could just get in there and tweak the laws of nature just a little bit every so often so that those catastrophes wouldn't happen. We would still get all the good outcomes. We would still be able to predict because there would just be these minor little variations that would stop all the bad things from happening. And that would just be much better. It would be worth it, and it would be better because we wouldn't have these horrible catastrophes. Or maybe the parts are rearranged. So, for example, earthquakes are caused by parts of the earth grinding against each other. Well, maybe it would be better if the parts of the earth were arranged differently, they wouldn't grind against each other, they wouldn't produce earthquakes. Or if the atmosphere and the oceans were arranged differently, hurricanes wouldn't form, and there wouldn't be tsunamis, and there wouldn't be viruses wouldn't arise that are fatal to us, or some of us. So you could have the parts better arranged. Or you could have the sun and the earth arranged so that the sun's not eventually going to expand and melt the earth to slag, to just destroy the earth. So the parts could be arranged better. We could still have predictability and many good outcomes, but these catastrophes would be avoided. And Hume thinks, look, certainly the parts could be arranged differently. The laws could be modified just a little bit every so often by God so that the catastrophes don't come about. We'd still have the good outcomes. We'd still have the predictability, but we wouldn't have all of this natural evil. And so again, if there were either of those changes, then things would be better than they are. And so the actual laws, the actual way the universe is arranged physically, is it worth it? Maybe it is, but it is not for the best. There are lots of ways in which it's not well designed, just like a bad house is not well designed. So these four circumstances, in Hume's view, they cooperate to cause much of the natural evil that isn't for the best. The universe has complex parts that interact in regular ways that produce threats of all sorts: hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, diseases, and so on. Humans and animals have limited powers, and so we often can't cope with these threats. That means we're frequently damaged and therefore frequently in pain or just destroyed. So it's the way the universe works, the way the universe is arranged, our limited abilities, and then that we feel pain. All of those cooperate to cause us to feel pain and then often to be destroyed. So in Hume's view, there are many natural evils that are not for the best. So in Hume's view, there are many natural evils that are not for the best. So I think we can see why Hume thinks that. In our next and last video, we're then going to plug that back into the argument to see what Hume's overall argument is, that there is no perfect being. So that's what we'll do in our next video.